Rain lashed against the restaurant's glass walls as thunder rolled over the city skyline. The warm lights inside the exclusive rooftop dining room flickered against silver cutlery and crystal glasses. Waiters glided between tables whispering, "Madam," and "Sir," as if afraid to disturb the expensive silence. But all that froze when a quiet voice broke through the tension of an argument no one expected to witness. "She's with me," the single dad said, his voice low, calm, and steady enough to silence a storm. Every head in the room turned toward him. The billionaire heiress, who had moments earlier been laughing with her polished guests, stood frozen beside the table. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled slightly, and her eyes widened, not out of fear, but recognition. The man standing before her wasn't dressed in silk or tailored linen. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, faint traces of engine oil still on his hands. Yet his presence, raw and unshaken, commanded more respect than the million-dollar suits surrounding him. "Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, humility, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Hope. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them." His name was Ethan Cole, a 34-year-old single father who worked as a mechanic on the edge of town. His life had been a cycle of survival since the day his wife died in childbirth 6 years ago, leaving him with their only daughter, Lily. Raising her had been both his heartbreak and his redemption. Every greasy late night fixing cars, every skipped meal to save for her school shoes, it all made sense when she smiled and called him her hero. The billionaire heiress was Isabella Hartwell, daughter of the man who owned half the city's skyline. Her father's company had recently bought the small auto shop where Ethan worked, intending to shut it down and replace it with a luxury showroom. Ethan had gone there that evening, not as a guest but to deliver one last plea, to keep the garage alive, not for profit, but for the 5 other fathers who worked under him and relied on those paychecks to feed their families. He hadn't expected to see Isabella at the dinner. He hadn't expected to see her step up to humiliate him either. When he arrived at the restaurant, soaked from the rain and clearly out of place, laughter had rippled around the table. One of her guests had sneered, "They let mechanics in here now." Another joked about grease monkeys chasing billionaires. But Isabella, usually graceful and poised, had only stared, her eyes searching his face like she was seeing a ghost. Then, before anyone could say more, she stood abruptly and excused herself, her glass of wine trembling slightly in her hand. It wasn't arrogance in her eyes, it was something closer to pain. And when Ethan turned to leave, knowing he didn't belong there, she stopped him. "Wait," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to betray something she'd spent years hiding. That's when the man beside her, an investor with too much pride and too little compassion, smirked and grabbed her wrist lightly. "Let him go, Bella. He's not one of us." That's when Ethan turned back and spoke those 4 quiet words. "She's with me." No one in the restaurant understood what it meant. But Isabella did. She went pale, as if someone had torn open a door to her past she'd long since bolted shut. 6 years ago, before the fame, before the headlines, Isabella had been a very different woman. She'd been 22, curious and rebellious, sneaking out of her father's mansion to drive through the small towns her family's company quietly destroyed in the name of progress. One night, her car broke down near a lonely gas station, and the only person still awake there was Ethan. He had helped her fix the car without charging a penny. And when he saw the tears she tried to hide, he didn't ask questions, he simply said, "Sometimes engines need time. So do hearts." For weeks after that, she'd driven back, pretending her car had another issue. What she really wanted was to see him, to feel human, real, away from her father's empire. Ethan had no idea who she was until the night her father's men came and dragged her away, warning him never to contact her again. He never did. He raised his daughter, buried his dreams, and carried on. But Isabella never forgot the man who treated her like a person when everyone else treated her like property. Now, years later, she stood in front of him again. Older. Colder. Wearing a diamond ring she didn't want, in a room full of people she didn't love. And there he was, the man she once dreamed of, now standing up for something noble again. The table erupted in whispers. Her fiancé sneered, "What did you just say?" But Ethan didn't back down. He looked directly at Isabella and said again, quietly, "She's with me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. She remembered the smell of motor oil, the warmth of his laugh, the promise in his eyes that night under the stars when he'd said she deserved to be free. The man she was supposed to marry tried to laugh it off, but Isabella's silence cut sharper than any words. She looked down at her engagement ring, the one chosen for its size, not its meaning, and slowly slipped it off her finger. It fell to the table with a sound that seemed louder than thunder. She turned to Ethan and whispered, "You came for your people. You always did." That night, the tabloids called it a scandal. The billionaire heiress walks away from fortune for mechanic. Social media exploded with gossip and mockery. But for Isabella and Ethan, it wasn't drama, it was freedom. He didn't want her money. He didn't even want her pity. But when she came to his garage the next morning, wearing a simple coat, no makeup, and a look of raw honesty, he couldn't deny the truth he'd buried for too long. She told him she'd stopped the demolition order. The garage was safe. Then she said something that broke him quietly inside. "I couldn't stand there while they laughed at you," she said softly. "You once stood up for me when I couldn't do it for myself. Maybe tonight, I just returned the favor." Ethan didn't know what to say. For years, his life had been about survival, about Lily, about never daring to dream again. But Isabella wasn't a dream, she was a reminder that some people are sent back into your life for a reason. Still, the city didn't let them be. Reporters hounded the garage. Her father threatened to disinherit her. Even Ethan's co-workers warned him, "She's too different, man. Don't get burned." But what no one saw was how genuine she was with Lily. She'd show up after school with paintbrushes and snacks, helping Lily paint old car parts into colorful toys. The little girl, shy at first, began to call her Miss Bella. And one evening, while they sat in the fading light, Isabella whispered to Ethan, "She's got your eyes. The same kind eyes that made me stay that night." Life didn't change overnight. It rarely does. Isabella worked to rebuild her life from scratch, cut off from her father's empire but finally free to live on her own terms. She started using her influence for good, creating small business grants for local shops like Ethan's. She no longer lived in penthouses but in a small rented home near the garage, where she found peace in simplicity. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled with guilt. He didn't want her to sacrifice everything for him. But she never once looked back with regret. Instead, she found happiness in watching Lily grow, in sharing meals under flickering light bulbs instead of chandeliers. Months turned into a year, and the scandal that once shocked the city slowly faded away. People found new gossip, new headlines. But in a quiet corner of that city, a little girl laughed freely as her father and Miss Bella worked side by side, building something that didn't need wealth to stand strong. One evening, after closing the garage, they went to the same rooftop restaurant again, not as guests of wealth, but as customers who had earned every bit of their joy. The waiter recognized them, though he pretended not to. They sat by the window, watching the city lights dance over the rain-soaked streets. Isabella turned to him and said, "Do you remember the first time I saw you here?" He smiled. "I remember saying something stupid. You said, 'She's with me.'" She looked down shyly. "And for the first time in my life, I wanted that to be true." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "It is true." And for once, she didn't freeze. She didn't doubt. She didn't look back at the world she'd left behind. Because in that moment, surrounded by simple warmth and honest laughter, she finally understood what it meant to be rich. Not in money. In love. In peace. In belonging. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Silent Hope for more stories that remind us love isn't found in luxury, but in loyalty, courage, and second chances. Speech balloon special request. Comment below with the words, "She's with me," if you believe love built on kindness and truth is worth everything. That night, as the rain began again outside the restaurant, Lily looked up at the stars through the window and said softly, "Daddy, Miss Bella's staying, right?" Ethan smiled and wrapped his arm around both of them. "Yes," he whispered. "She's with us." And for the first time in years, all three of them felt like home wasn't a place anymore, it was each other.